Hello, good morning, and good afternoon for those who are watching this lecture video in the afternoon. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat, alright? Now, at this moment, we will be discussing learning and teaching principles, okay? Your subject with me is teaching principles of teaching. So, I have discussed to you the etymology of principles, of teaching principles, of what does it mean. But this particular subject would try to explain to us, okay, would attempt to explain what is the definition of learning, okay? How should we look, or how should we define learning in terms of different school of thoughts like behaviorism and cognitivism? So how different does behaviorists or do behaviorists define learning compared to the cognitivist view of how learning happens, okay? So there are many people or many personalities, educators, that have attempted to discuss what learning is in terms of their personal perspective, in terms of their studies na ginawa nila. And those personalities are very important to know, no? Kailangan nyo silang makilala at kailangan nyong matandaan yung mga pangalan nila at yung mga ginawa nila sa pag-define ng learning and, you know, in education as a whole, no? In the science of studying education as a whole, they are very important people. They are very relevant people that you don't want to miss, you don't want to not know, because they will be coming out in your licensure exam and they will be coming out in your midterm exam also. Okay, so kailangan nyo silang ma-memorize, okay? Kung merong Isaac Newton, kung merong Albert Einstein sa science, sa education, sa principles of teaching, meron din tayo mga tao, may mga personalities tayo na dapat hindi natin nakakalimutan because they have contributed so much in the study of education, in the study of how learning happens, and those people are actually coming out in the licensure exam for teachers, particularly on the professional education area. Okay, so proceeding here to our lesson, we're going to be studying learning and teaching principles. So, what is learning, no? Ano nga ba ang learning? Well, I have mentioned in the previous discussion, no, I have defined what learning is, I have discussed what learning is, and we believe that, or we discussed that learning is a change in behavior due to experience. But I will be discussing that in detail today, alright? So, learning involves a change, okay, maybe for good or bad, okay? It involves a change maybe for good or bad, okay? You know, sabi nila, learning is sometimes a painful process. Alright, pag sinabing learning is a painful process, may mga pagkakataon na natututo tayo mula sa ating pagkakamali. Okay, so kahit ito'y pagkakamali, we don't look at it as if it's the end of the world, but we look at it as an opportunity to learn. Alright, so learning does not only involve something that is always good, but sometimes it's also bad. Okay, so learning involves change, and this change may be for good or for bad. So it is important as teachers that we need to regulate now the learning experiences of our learners, because sometimes they learn for good, but sometimes also they learn for bad. So they can learn bad things, they can learn good things, and at the end, no, these learnings can eventually come up with a result that is not beneficial for them. So we have to really be careful on the learning experiences that we design for our students, because learning can sometimes be bad or can sometimes be good. Okay, so but we know for a fact that learning should involve a change. Okay, learning should involve a change. So whether that is bad or a good change, that's still learning. So change may not be evident until a situation arises in which the new behavior can occur. Learning is not always reflected in performance. Alright, so you can see two points here, no? Learning involves change, although that change cannot be manifested externally, or it cannot be it cannot arise. Okay, cannot arise in which the new behavior can occur, no? Hindi mo siya ma-witness agad-agad. So not at all times that we can see learning as a reflection of performance. Okay, because sometimes learning can happen even without seeing it. Okay, kahit ikaw na teacher, hindi mo nakikita, hindi mo na-observe yung bata, hindi mo masasabing hindi siya natututo. Kasi maaring nag-iisip na siya, maaring binubuo niya ng concept sa utak niya at nagkakaroon ng pagkatuto sa kanya. So not at all times that we can observe how learning happens. Okay, so but it is true that learning should involve change. It could be a change in your behavior, it could be a change in your thinking process, it could be a change in how you look at the world. Okay, so for example, no, you have learned something about government problems, issues, national issues, social issues. So, but by learning how this affect the life of the Filipino people, then you change now your concept of understanding how life in the Philippines should be working. Okay, so for example, no, the Dolomite sand and all the issues that the government are facing, and then suddenly you have sparked the idea na mali nga ito. Dapat ganito yung tama. Dapat ganito ako nakikisalamuha o ganito yung ginagawa ako to become a responsible citizen of the country. In other words, hindi mo man minamanifest, but in your actions, but in the way you think, there has been a change. We can still consider that as learning. Okay? So, in a behavioral perspective, no, learning is a change in behavior that should be observable. But for a cognitive perspective, no, it may not be observable in nature. Alright, so we'll be talking about that, no, the definitions of learning according to two theories, behaviorism and cognitivism. Not all changes reflect learning, though. Okay, not all changes reflect learning. There are changes in behavior that are not permanent. Always remember, no, a change that is permanent is learning, but a change that is not permanent is not learning. So, for example, I have said na natuto ako ngayon kasi kaya ko nang magsayaw ng pandango sa ilaw. So I was able to do that for a while, but tomorrow hindi ko na alam. Is that learning? No. So basically, when we talk about learning is a change in behavior, but make sure that learning is what? Permanent. Okay? So a temporary change in behavior cannot be considered as learning. It should be permanent. Okay? Pag sinabing permanent, hindi nawawala. Okay? Hindi nawawala sa'yo. Matagal siyang nag-i-stay sa utak mo. Matagal siyang nag-i-stay as muscle memory. If it's overtly manifested, ganun ang learning. Okay? So, not all changes can reflect learning. Make sure that is permanent. Okay? That change is permanent. So, halimbawa, no, a classic example is when you drink liquor, okay, pag umiinom ka ng alak, tendency is nagbabago yung behavior mo. Ang tao, pag nakainom ng alak, yung iba, nagbabago yung behavior. So, may pagbabago sa kanilang behavior. Nagiging mas madaldal, nagiging sociable sa tao, o kaya naman nagiging emotional. Kahit hindi naman siya emotional sa totoong buhay, sa normal life niya, nagiging emotional siya, iyak siya ng iyak, o kaya naman nagiging madaldal. So, dahil nakakainom, nagiging madaldal siya at nakakausap niya yung pangataong hindi naman niya dating kinakausap. So, ano yun? That is a change in behavior. That is a fact, no? Pero, pag itong tao na to, pag nakainom, pag balik niya, pag sa bahay, at pag gising niya, kinabukasan, wala na yung learning na yun. Wala na yung change in behavior na yun. So, we cannot tell that is learning. We cannot conclude that is learning because that change in behavior is not permanent. It was just a temporary change in behavior. So, any behavioral change due to drugs, due to medicine, or due to any experience, okay, that is not permanent, then that is not learning. So, learning happens when it is due to an experience and that change is considered permanent. Okay, halimbawa, for example, no, I wasn't like this when I was in high school. I wasn't like this when I was in elementary. I was not so fluent in speaking English. I was not confident in speaking English. I always think of tama ba yung sasabihin ko o mali ba yung sasabihin kong English. Iniisip ko yung mga vocabulary na gagamitin ko. I wasn't so confident. I was not so willing to take risks na magkamali sa mga sinasabi. That is my behavior, noon nung elementary at high school. But now that I have learned that it's okay to commit mistakes, that it's open to say things, kahit hindi ka fluent, basta nagtatry ka, that would be fine, that is okay. So I have changed my behavior from that kind of person to what I am now. Alright, so that is permanent because tomorrow I can do it again. In the next week, I can do it again. And in the next years, I believe I can do it again. So, it's a permanent change in behavior. So, the way you speak, learning how to speak, learning how to use specific vocabularies in language, learning how to dance permanently, learning how to sing well, okay, without, wala naman sigurong taong gumagaling kumanta pag nakainom, no? Well, basically, yung mga ganung pagkakataon, so learning happens when the change in behavior is permanent. Okay? So, yeah, learning is reflected in behavior, a change in an individual thought process, as what I've mentioned, or attitude, not accompanied by behavior. So, hindi lahat ay pwedeng i-attribute natin sa behavior lang. Pero, may mga pagkakataon nga, sabi ko nga kanina, na may pagbabago sa ating kaisipan, na may mga pagbabago sa ating pangunawa sa mga bagay-bagay na hindi naman kinakailangan ng external manifestation or an action that can be observable. So, yung mga ganung pagkakataon, that is learning. Okay, so it should be further clarified that learning needs to result in behavior potentiality and not necessarily in the behavior itself. Okay, next. So the change in behavior should occur as a result of experience, practice, or training. This implies that behavior caused from maturity, disease, or physical damages does not constitute learning. So, it should be a result of experience. Okay? Yung mga pagbabago sa behavior mo dahil tumangkad ka, dahil tumaba ka, those are not experiences that we can consider as learning. Okay? So, learning should be a result of experience. What kind of experience? Well, ang daming experiences na pwedeng pagawa sa classroom, right? Pwede ka magpa-group work, pwede ka magpa-games, pwede ka magpa-recitation, pwede ka magpa-assessment strategies. Those are examples of experiences where learners can actually learn. Okay? Practice or training. So, halimbawa, no? Kung ikaw ay isang atleta, syempre, pag atleta ka at makikompete ka sa iba't ibang competition here and abroad, you have to do a lot of training. You have to do a lot of practice. Okay, so as a result, no, mas nagiging malakas ka, mas nagiging matalino ka sa paglalaro, and can we consider that as learning? Well, definitely, yes, because it is a result of an experience. It is a result of a practice, and it's a result of a training. So, sabi ko kanina, if it's a result of a medicine consumption, or a drug consumption, or liquor consumption, we cannot consider that as learning. So, mamaya, kunwari, estudyante mo, nakainom, halimbawa, college teacher ka. Syempre, may mga pagkakataon, no, in my entire experience as a teacher, there are so many instances that my learners are even older than me, no? Pumasok sila sa classroom na nakainom at eventually, dumaldal sila, mas naging participative sila sa klase. Eh di sabi mo, natututo tong batang to. Well, you have to be careful about that. Okay, so if tomorrow that did not happen anymore, then you have to ask yourself, what happened? Okay, ano nangyari? Was that learning? Well, it's not a permanent change in behavior, and therefore we cannot count that is learning. But you can give that, or you can use that as a starting point to change the behavior of your learners. Sasabihin mo, hoy, kagabi, kahapon, ganito ka. O ngayon, ba't ganyan ka na? O, you know you can do it. Sabihin mo sa kanya, you know you can do it. Okay, kayang-kaya mo naman tong ginagawa mo eh. Kaya mo naman tong gawin eh. Alright? So you have to be confident about yourself. Okay? Because you have the ability, you have the capability, and I believe that you can do this thing. So you can use that as a starting point. Okay? So, wag mong pagalitan. Pagalitan mo, syempre, pagsabihan mo kung bakit nangyari yon, bakit siya uminom. Pero, use that as a starting point to transform the behavior of your learner. Okay? Kasi kung kaya niya naman, na nakainom siya, maaaring kaya niya rin pag wala siyang naiinom. Okay? So, psychology would always tell na, yung behavior na yun, di ba? In wine, there is truth. So, nailalabas mo yung sino ka pag ikaw ay nakainom. So, malay natin, kahit naman hindi siya nakainom, siguro hindi lang siya confident, pero kaya niyang ilabas kung anong kaya niyang ipakita sa kanyang sarili. Okay? Yung kanyang talent, yung kanyang talino, pwede niyang ipakita yan. Okay? Though not implied in any standard definition of learning, contrary to popular belief, learning is not confined to one's schooling. Okay? Well, that is true. Hindi lahat ng bagay ay natututunan sa eskwelahan. Okay? Maraming mga pagkakataon, and I can tell, no, siguro 70 to 80% of what I have been telling you guys, I have not learned them in school. I have not learned them inside a classroom, but I've learned them from experiences. I have talked to my co-teachers, I have conversed with some people outside, and I have learned from their experiences. So yung mga sinasabi kong experiences na to, yung mga examples ko, well, this did not come from inside the classroom when I was studying in college, but these things were sharings from my friends, from my classmates, from their experiences when they were teaching. Okay, so in other words, learning can happen beyond the classroom. Learning can happen even at home, even in, using Facebook, even using your cell phones, in the church, in the marketplace, in many places. Okay, so sabi nga natin, learning is different from education because learning is or schooling, I should say, is different from education. Schooling only happens inside the school, but education can happen in many places. So those as well as learning, because learning can also happen in school and can also happen outside the school. So in other words, this implies that you have to use this information as a future teacher to maximize the experiences of your learners. Tell them that they should not stop learning from the classroom, but they should extend their motivation to learn beyond the classroom. Okay, beyond the classroom. But you have to remind them, for example, yung internet, yung internet is a very good example of a place outside the classroom that you can learn a lot of things. Okay, you can learn a lot of things by simply clicking to Google, by simply logging into Google, or even in Facebook alone, just browsing your timeline. There are a lot of things that you can learn, but you have to remind your learners, you have to remind your students to screen what they want, what they should believe in. Okay, because not all things in Facebook are true. Not all things in Facebook are worthy to read. Okay, so they have to discern. They have to know how to discern, to discriminate information that will be useful for them. Okay, that will be useful for them, because there are dangerous information. Okay, there are dangerous information that could not benefit them at all. Okay, so that is learning. That is our definition of learning. In other words, people, in a nutshell, learning is a change in behavior. It's a permanent change in behavior due to experience, but that behavior can be overt, that behavior can be covert. Sometimes we cannot observe this behavior, but still the learner is learning. Okay, so let's discuss the different principles of learning. So this would tell us, or this would give us a belief system, or this would contribute to our belief system on how we interpret learning. At magbibigay ito ng tips sa atin kung ano nga ba at kung paano natin gagawin ang ating pagtuturo sa loob ng klase. Amen. Sabi ko nga noon, remember, you cannot understand learning, or you cannot effectively teach if you don't know how learning happens. Diba? Paano ka magtuturo kung hindi mo alam kung paano nga ba nagaganap ang pagkatuto? Right? No offense to many of you, ito dapat tandaan ng lahat, even education graduates or non-education graduates. You cannot really effectively teach if you don't know how learning happens. Okay, if you don't understand how learning happens, then you cannot effectively teach. You should be putting your shoes in the or you should put yourself in the shoes of your learners. Okay? Naging mag-aaral ka din naman at na experience mo kung paano mag-aral, di ba? So kung ikaw ay isang guro, you have to always understand the situations of your learners. Not all your learners are the same. They are different in terms of many aspects. Their intelligence, their learning styles, their physical situations, their conditions at home, they are very different in many ways. Okay, so you have to always put yourself to the shoes of your learners. What makes a teacher different from many teachers is that when they practice empathy, when they practice being human. Okay, being a human person, being a human being. Okay, I learned from my professor when I took my doctors. You know what sabi niya? You know what separates you from other teachers? You are doctors. Okay, you're taking doctors. You're taking your PhD, and you're not supposed to be after this. You're not supposed to be an intellectual monster or a intellectual giant or intellectual monster. Kasi PhD na kayo, doctors na kayo eh. Well, that's the peak of it. You can do postgraduate studies, you can do postdoctoral studies, but pag naka-PhD ka na, okay na yon. That is a very high accomplishment already. So she mentioned to us, what separates you from others is not the thing that you know, or the amount of information that you know, the amount of knowledge that you have right now, but being a human being. Okay, what separates you is being a human being, being human. Okay, so when she mentioned about that, sabi niya, dapat iba kayo kasi kailangan hindi lang matalino pero naiintindihan nyo yung inyong mga mag-aaral. Okay, so these principles of learning would give us an idea of how we can actually understand our learners. So, learning is a process of actively constructing knowledge. Okay, well, it's an active process. Learning is an active process. Okay, it can never be passive. It should always be an active process. Okay, so therefore, teachers and administrators have a responsibility to create an environment that would promote that. Okay, that would promote active learning. Okay, active learning. Engage learners in experiences that encourage their personal construction of knowledge, hands-on, minds-on science and math, and many strategies. Okay, provide learners with experiences that actively involve them and are personally meaningful. Okay, in other words, people, hindi sapat na nakaupo lang yung mga learners mo. Okay, remember that learning is an active process. So if it becomes passive, if your learners are just sitting down listening to you without any activities at all, well, you are not a believer of this principle of learning, because you think to believe, or you believe that, you know, it's enough that I talk and then the learners listen to me and then they learn from me. No. Okay, because it is an active process. In the 21st century education, we must always remember that learning is an active process. In other words, give the learners activities, give the learners something to do so that they can learn better. They can learn from you while you are talking, while you are discussing to them, but they can learn better if there are activities that you are letting them do. Okay, sabi ko nga noon, the more senses involved in learning, the better learning that happens. And you can only do that when you engage them in engaging activities, in enjoyable activities. Okay, so yeah, so you have to devise many strategies in teaching. You have to be familiar with many strategies of teaching, and you have to practice that. You have to employ that in your teaching so that your learners can learn better. Okay, your learners can learn better. Okay, but you know, not only the teacher, hindi lang tungkulin ng teacher ito, pero the administrator and the school managers themselves have very crucial roles, no, in making this happen. Kasi paano ka magpapa-activity sa bata kung wala kang materials na gagamitin, kung wala kang resources? So the teacher do not at first, hindi trabaho ng teacher na mag-provide ng resources. Okay, mag-provide ng materials, trabaho yan ng ating school managers to find ways so that they can give us our teaching resources. Pero sa mga pagkakataon tulad nito at sa Pilipinas, madalas ang nangyayari ay ang mga teachers din mismo bumibili at gumagawa ng kanilang mga teaching resources. Well, that is the that is what we pay for, no? Pag pinili nating mga guro sa Pilipinas. But I believe in the next years, no, sana naman ay magbago na ito at bigyan tayo ng pagkakataon na tayo magturo lamang, no? Andiyan yung mga materials ibibigay ng eskwelahan at trabaho natin ay gamitin yung mga materials na ito. At naniniwala ako na pag ganun ang nangyari sa ating bansa, then, you know, our educational system will really flourish. Okay? Number 2, students construct knowledge and make it meaningful in terms of their prior knowledge and experiences. So, you are not a believer of tabula rasa by John Locke, no? Pag sinabing tabula rasa, it's a blank slate. So, pumapasok ang mga bata sa eskwelahan nang walang alam. Okay? So, they started with a blank slate. Okay? With a blank state. Ibig sabihin, na trabaho ni teacher ay pupunuan niya yun. Susulatan niya yung blackboard na yun na walang laman. Okay? But, you know, hindi naman laging totoo yan. Halimbawa, no? Sino nagturo may nagturo ba sa baby kung paano dumede sa kanyang nanay? Wala, di ba? So, there are skills that are innate. In other words, you know, we did not start as blank. We did not start with an empty shell, with an empty information in our brain. So, we have some sort of instincts and innate abilities that did not require learning or acquiring it from external environments. Okay, so our learners have prior knowledge, and they can construct knowledge. In other words, these two here mirrors to a school of thoughts, no, yung tinatawag nating connectivism and constructivism. So, in constructivism philosophy, sabi natin yan, okay, I believe, no, na-discuss nyo yan sa teaching profession subject nyo sa block, yung hindi ko hinawakan ng block 3 and block 2, di ba? Hindi ko kayo, but block 6, I handle them in teaching prof 2. Okay, in block 3 and block 2, no, I believe na napag-aralan nyo yan, yung mga teaching philosophies natin, no, okay, Constructivism believes in the idea that the learners are actively engaged in construction of knowledge. So they have the ability to construct their own meaning. Okay, to construct their own meaning. And of course, they have prior knowledge. Ang tawag natin dyan is schema, no? Schema, according to the it's cognitive development theory by John Piaget. Okay, in facilitating learning, dapat alam nyo yan. By John Piaget, pinag-usapan doon yung schema or prior knowledge. So you have to build on that schema by your learners, because that schema, kung ano man ang nakasave sa utak nila, that means na meaningful para sa kanila yan. Okay? Dahil nakasave eh. Kung hindi nakasave yan, ibig sabihin hindi ito relevant sa kanila. Pero dahil nakasave, it is meaningful for them. So you have to build, okay, you have to explore that schema and then build your lesson based on that schema. That is how we use this schema. Kaya nga, sinabi ko yung connectionism. We connect our today's lesson, our present lesson, to the previous discussion. But you have to ask them what they have learned, what have made an impact to them, what learning from yesterday made an impact to them. And based on that, okay, you build on your present lesson based on what have been stored in their mind. Okay, so you have to find out what students already know and what they can already do. Okay, so create learning environment and plan experiences that builds on the learner's prior knowledge. Makikita natin dito na ang pagtuturo ay hindi dapat fragmented. Maraming pagkakataon sa inyo, okay, I believe, kasi I experience it too eh, maraming pagkakataon sa learning ng bata in the public educational system that the teachers tend to forget how to connect, okay, the previous lesson to the present lesson. If they fail to do that, no, magiging fragmented yung understanding ng mga bata sa ating mga lessons. Anong ibig sabihin ng fragmented? Hiwa-hiwalay. Hindi nila nako-connect ang previous lesson to the present lesson. So, ang tingin nila, itong lesson na to, separate yan. Okay? Separate ang understanding ko dyan. Itong lesson na to, separate din yan. But in reality, no, we have to teach them that this lesson is really connected to the next lessons so that they can build a holistic idea of what they're trying to understand. Because if only they are understanding it in a fragmented manner, hindi yun understanding. Okay? Hindi yun understanding. Because this is one. This is another one. This is another one. But there is no connection built between these topics or between these lessons. So, dun tayo magkakaroon ng problema. Okay, maraming bata ang hindi nakakaalam o mahina ang reading comprehension dahil hindi nila alam kung paano magpatugma-tugma o kaya naman mag-connect, magtagpi-tagpi ng mga impormasyon sa kanilang leksyon. Okay, so make sure that your lessons, you have to design a lesson plan that would integrate, okay, that would connect your previous lesson to the next lesson. So, napaka-importante yan. Napaka-importante yan. Okay, number 3, learning is enhanced when it takes place in a social and collaborative environment. Well, this is a premise of 21st century learning environment. This is a premise of progressivism as a teaching philosophy. Okay, hindi na uso yung individual learning. Hindi na uso yung ako lang mag-aaral. Excuse me. Hindi na uso yung ipe-place mo lang yung isang tao sa loob ng classroom, yung pinakamatalino lang. No, those are passé. Those are how do you call this? Traditional, and they should be put in the trash can already. Those ideas should be put in the trash can already. It is important that learners should be able to learn how to collaborate with other people, how to be sociable. Okay, because after graduation, okay, after in the actual workplace, pag sila na ay nagtrabaho, hindi lang naman sila lang, okay, di ba? Maraming mga employers na naghahanap ng ability sa mga learners na teamwork, yung kaya nilang makapagtrabaho na may kasamang mga ibang kaopisina nila. So, importante na kung nasa eskwelahan pa lamang ay na-enhance na o natututunan na ng bata ang ability to learn collaboratively. Okay, to learn collaboratively. Okay, because learning is social. Okay, learning is social. Learning is not antisocial. Learning should always be social. Okay, the fact that the teacher is there talking to the learners, and the learners have feedbacks to the teachers, and the teachers have feedbacks to the learners, that is social. That is a social undertaking. Okay, the fact that the learners have their classmates in their classrooms, the fact that learners have there are many teachers, okay, and they interact with those teachers, with the canteen supervisors, or with the principal or anyone really inside the school, it's a social undertaking, okay? Because the school is a community. The school is a mini community, and there should be a social undertaking in that community. So you have to make sure that it becomes social for them, okay? In that way, we can give an opportunity for our learners to, yung mga mahiyain na matutong makisalumuha sa ibang tao, okay? Makisalumuha sa kanilang mga classmates, and to work in teams, because that skill, okay, working in teams, the ability to work in teams is very important nowadays, especially in the 21st century environment. Okay, number 4, students need to continue to view learning as an integrated whole. This is what I'm telling you, okay? Many teachers fail to integrate lessons to each other. Okay, for example, in sciences, no, maraming mga pagkakataon na ang mga teachers sa science ay, okay, ito ang topic 1 natin, to topic 2 natin, to topic 3 natin, pero hindi na nabibigyan ng halaga kung ano nga ba ang connection ng topic 1 sa topic 2. For example, you have discussed atoms. Okay, there you discuss atoms, and then you discuss the periodic table of elements. So how are the concepts on the understanding of the atom connected to the periodic table of the elements? Okay, so you have to emphasize that. You have to build a connection on your previous topic to the present lesson. Okay, so pag kayo ay nagturo na, halimbawa, dapat alam mo kung paano maglagyan ng connection itong dalawa na to. Kasi makakatulong yan eh. Dahil pag ikaw ay nagtanong ng isang bagay na hindi lamang sa isang lesson siya nakatuon, pero ito rin ay pwedeng ito rin ay pwede nating gamitin bilang tanong sa iba pang mga leksyon, they will have an understanding of that. Okay, they will have a holistic understanding of that. Kaya nga sabi dito, students need to continue to view learning as an integrated whole. Okay, as an integrated whole. Hindi siya fragmented information, but it should be treated as a whole. Okay, so that after the lesson, after you have taken this subject, no, pagkatapos ng 1 year of taking this subject, hindi lang atoms ang naintindihan mo, pero yung mismong chemistry, yung mismong physics, yung mismong biology ang nakuha mo, okay, ang naintindihan mo. So, halimbawa, dito sa principles of teaching. So, hindi lang kung ano nga ba yung different, ano ba yung previous lesson natin? Talk about, what is that? I forgot our previous lesson. It was, the previous lesson was, let me remember. We talked about the elements of teaching and learning. Yeah, so nabanggit ko nga yan. Okay, so on the elements of teaching and learning, so you have to make sure, okay, that you don't understand that separate to the understanding of the present lesson. Katulad nito, learning, pinag-uusapan na natin ang learning. So, well, what are the elements that are connected to this topic? Well, we talked about learners. So we talked about how learners learn. Okay, and what are the qualities of learners? So now that we are looking at principles of learning, we can connect the information we got now, okay, to the information that we got previously in our previous lesson. Okay. Number 5. Learners must see themselves as capable and successful. Okay, sometimes learning is a painful process, as I have mentioned, but despite that, okay, we make sure that we give chances for our learners to compose themselves, to have a chance to prove what they can do, or what they can give, or what can they offer to the class. Okay, so they must see themselves as capable and successful. Ang tawag natin dyan ay academic self-concept. We must make sure that our learners have a sort of academic self-concept, because if they do not have academic self-concept, they will not have a perception about themselves, they will not have an image about themselves, and therefore they will not have any baseline on how they will perform in the succeeding lessons. Okay. Number 6, learning have different ways of knowing. Learners have different ways of knowing and representing knowledge. Well, we talked about that previously. Okay, we talked about multiple intelligences. We talked about different learning styles, and we talked about the factors that would make them different. They have appetitive and cognitive faculties, but there are factors that are making them different too. So they are different, and you have to consider those differences in designing your lesson. Number 7, reflection is an integral part of learning. We call this metacognition. Okay, metacognition. So at the end of a lesson, make sure that your learners are able to reflect. Okay, to go back to what they have learned. Anong natutunan ko? Natutunan ko ba siya talaga? Anong naging importante sa akin? Anong may i-apply ko sa tunay na buhay? You have to ask those questions to our learners because when they're able to answer those questions, ibig sabihin they were able to process their learning. They were able to process their thinking. Kaya nga tinatawag natin na thinking about own thinking. So aside from metacognition is thinking about own thinking, we also want them to learn how to learn. So metacognition is also aiming at making our learners learn how to learn. Okay. Now, let's now proceed to the different learning theories. No, sabi ko nga, there are many definitions of how learning happens. Generally, there are two schools of thoughts on how learning happens. On the definition of learning, that is behaviorism and cognitivism. So behavioral learning theory and cognitive theories and metacognition. Okay, so what is the difference between behavioral and cognitive theories? Well, when we talk about the behavioral theory, it operates on the principle of stimulus-response theory. So, anong ibig sabihin ng stimulus-response theory? Okay, so pag sinabi nating stimulus-response, well, I have discussed this already, no? Yung stimulus natin, and then we have a response. So, if you ask a question to a learner, that's your stimulus, the question is the stimulus, and then the moment that your learners have responded to you, then that's the response, okay? In other words, we prefer to concentrate on actual or observable behavior. So kung ano nakikita natin, kung ano naririnig natin sa bata, yun ang ating emphasis on how learning happens. Okay, so para siyang, yun nga sinasabi ko na hindi natin pwedeng masabing learning yun kung hindi natin nakikita. Pero a school of thought has opposed that, no? It has opposed that, and that is cognitive theory. Okay, dito naman, hindi naman lahat kasi ng learning manifestation ay nakikita mo o na-observe mo. So, maaaring ito'y proseso sa utak, pag-unawa sa isang konsepto. So, ang main focus naman ng cognitive theory ay yung memory. Okay? The storage and retrieval of information. Kung paano na-store ang information sa utak ng tao at kung yung kakayahan ng bata na ma-retrieve itong information na to sa kanyang utak. Okay? So, prefer to concentrate on analyzing cognitive processes. So, when you're asking them questions and then you're giving them thought-provoking questions, that is the focus of cognitive theory. Believe in non-observable behavior. So, as I have mentioned, the main difference is that behavioral learning theory would believe that learning happens when there's an observable behavior that can be manifested by the learner. But for cognitive theories, it believes that not all learning can be observable. There are non-observable behavior that we can still classify as learning. So let's begin with behavioral learning theories, and I have discussed how in the teaching profession pala yan. So if you are my students in the teaching profession, you would know my explanation on Pavlov's classical conditioning. No, there are two conditioning techniques. No, we have operant and we have classical conditioning. Yung operant conditioning, that is for B.F. Skinner, but for Pavlov, ito yung classical conditioning niya. Now, these are attempts to understand how learning happens. Conditioning, according to behaviorism, is the moment that you are able to condition a certain learner, then there is learning that is happening. Okay, so learning is conditioning according to behaviorism. Okay, so you're conditioning them to do something. You're manipulating them to do something. So you present to them a stimulus, and then they would respond to that. But if you do not want that kind of response, you have the ability to manipulate the learner and until you get the response that you want. Okay, so halimbawa, ikaw ay ang bata na observe mo na makulit, 'di ba? Makulit. So, pinagsabihan mo, hindi pa rin nag-change yung behavior, makulit pa rin siya. So, babaguhin mo yung stimulus mo. Pag hindi na daan sa santong dasalan, daanin sa santong paspasan. So, pinalo mo, piningot mo. So, ano nangyari? Tumahimik yung bata. So, in other words, binibigyan mo ng stimulus, okay, nagpa-present ka ng stimulus sa bata so that you will be able to elicit a response that you want. Okay? But that example is a operant conditioning technique, no? Hindi siya classical conditioning. That is operant conditioning because you're giving a reward or you're giving a punishment to modify a behavior. But there is a similarity between classical and operant conditioning. It's both conditioning techniques and you're attempting to modify the behavior of your learners. So, what is the difference? Sa classical conditioning, walang concept of reinforcement, okay? Sa classical conditioning, ang ginawa kasi ni Ivan Pavlov is meron siyang bell, tapos meron siyang meat. So, at first, yung meat muna pinakita niya sa dog. And so, the dog was able to nagpakita siya ng response. So, naglawa yung dog kasi nakita niya yung meat na pagkain niya. So, ang ginawa ni Ivan Pavlov, gusto niyang ma-transform yung stimulus into another stimulus. So, meron tayong unconditioned stimulus, which is the meat, and then we have the neutral stimulus, which is the bell. So, before conditioning, present yung both. Syempre, pag nakita yung meat, may salivation. Pero pag yung bell, wala namang ibig sabihin sa kanya, hindi man niya makakain, so no salivation. Now, during conditioning, ang ginawa ni Ivan Pavlov, pinakita niya yung meat with the bell. Okay, pinatunog niya yung bell, tapos pinakita niya yung meat. So, nakikita ng aso, yung bell. Ay, yung dog. Yung meat. So, ano nangyari? Nagsalivate yung dog. Kasi nga, meron pa rin siya nakikitang meat. So, inulit-ulit niya yan. Inuulit-ulit niya yung bell at saka yung meat na pinapakita. And then, at one point, tinanggal niya yung meat at yung bell na lang. So, what happened? Nagsalivate yung dog. Ibig sabihin, nagkaroon ng pagbabago sa behavior niya kasi dahil yung neutral stimulus, yung bell, nung una, hindi siya nagsasalivate. Pero ngayon, narinig niya lang yung bell, meron ng salivation. Okay, so nagkaroon ng change in behavior. And that behavior is observable, is observable. So there is a conditioned stimulus and now that we have a conditioned response. Maraming pagkakataon sa learners na nangyayari yan. Okay? May mga pinapalitan si teacher sa behavior, sa kanyang ginagawa, sa kanyang stimulus, so that he would elicit the same response from the learners, right? Yung pagtapik sa table, yung mga yan, yung pagtingin sa bata, di ba? So, halimbawa, hindi naman natin alam na, nung grade 1 tayo, pag tumahimik si teacher, hindi mo alam na anong ginagawa niya, anong gusto niya mangyari, right? Di ba? Pag tumahimik si teacher, wala lang, maingay pa rin. Kasi hindi mo naman alam kung anong ibig sabihin nung titig lang niya eh. Pero, the moment na sinabi niya, keep quiet, at saka sinabayan niya ng titig, tapos pagkatapos yung sinabing keep quiet, tahimik lang siya. At paulit-ulit yung ginagawa yan hanggang sa tumahimik na lang at hindi na siya nagsabi ng keep quiet, alam na natin kung anong gagawin natin. So that is an example of how classical conditioning happens inside the classroom. So in other words, as teachers, it may be bad to think about it, kasi ang tingin kasi ng behaviorism ay robots ang mga learners mo. You can manipulate them. You can change their behavior by presenting them a stimulus. Okay? So, you treat them as if they are robots that you can control, that you can manipulate their behavior. But sometimes that works. Okay? Sometimes that works, especially in classroom management and discipline. These things that behaviorism would teach us, would make us informed, is helpful for us. Changing the environment, changing the furnitures, di ba pag ang bata ay maingay, ang ginagawa ni teacher, pinapalipat ng upuan, o kaya naman ni-rearrange ni teacher yung upuan. So you are manipulating the environment so that you can manipulate the behavior of your learners. Okay, mga pakurtina natin, how do we fix the furnitures inside the classrooms? Those are ways of how to manipulate the behavior of our learners. So it requires creative thinking then. It requires critical thinking of how you can do this, okay? So that you can elicit the response that you would want from your learners. Now, meron pang isa bukod kay classical conditioning, si Edward Lee Thorndike naman on connectionism. So, I've mentioned this a while ago now. Pero, ang focus natin dito, yung kanyang laws of learning. Meron siyang sinasabing laws of learning. Tatlo yan. Law of readiness, law of exercise, and law of effect. So, this law states that an individual will learn when she's ready to do so. Law of readiness yan. Law of readiness. Okay, so ibig sabihin, it requires practice. Learning requires practice. Learning requires training. So, hindi mo aasahan na ang bata ay ma-demonstrate agad-agad yung gusto mong response sa kanya if the learner did not practice, if the learner did not train. So, a learning can be demonstrated when the learner is ready to do so. So, bigyan mo siya ng time. Halimbawa, pag nagtanong ka sa bata, sinabi mo, what is the meaning of symbiosis? And then, okay, what is the meaning of symbiosis? Gusto mo na meron na siyang sagot agad. No, you give them time to prepare. You give them time to think. Okay? You give them time to retrieve the information in their mind. And if that happens, at nagawa nila ng tama, well, you can tell that there's learning. Kasi alam niya na ang definition ng symbiosis. Pero kung hindi mo siya binigyan ng time, well, hindi magiging reliable yung conclusion mo. Hindi magiging reliable yung description mo sa bata. Kasi nga, sabi nga dito ni Thorndike, learning happens, okay, or learning can be externally manifested or can be demonstrated when they are ready to do so, when our learners are ready to do so. Okay? Letter B, law of exercise. So this law states that a connection is strengthened or weakened depending on the number of times it occurs and in promotion to the average vigor and duration of the connection. So sinasabi lang ng law of exercise na kung mas madalas mong ginagawa, mas nare-retain sa'yo, mas natututo ka. So law of use, connections between the stimulus and response are strengthened as they are used. So alam niyo na yung sinasabi nating law of disuse. Pag hindi mo ginagamit, nawawala, diba? Pero pag patuloy mong ginagamit yung skill na yon, mas lalo kang natututo. Pero pag hindi mo na nagagamit, nawawala yung skill na yon sa'yo. So there is law of use and disuse, and that is a long law of exercise. Yun yung law of disuse natin. So connections between the stimulus and response are weakened when practice is discontinued. Halimbawa, in my own personal experience, no, I am teaching physics. In the past. So a year after I graduated in college, I taught physics in MCNP and I taught physics in CSU. But now, for the past 3 years, wala na akong load in physics. Okay, so can I tell that I have a weekend foundation on physics? Yes, of course. Kasi hindi ko na siya tinuturo eh. So may mga pagkakataon na kailangan kong i-review, na magbasa pa rin ng libro sa physics para matutunan ko pag may nagpapaturo sa akin, pag may nagpapatutor sa akin on physics. Dahil hindi ko na tinuturo, I need to review it. I need to go back to the books and learn again. Pero mas madali na kasi naintindihan mo naman na previously. But that is a fact that, you know, when you have information that you are not using anymore, that it became how do you call this? You know, it became passive to you. You're not actively using it. There's a tendency na mawawala yung skill na yun sa'yo. So, kailangan ng practice, kailangan ng training, kailangan ng review. Okay? Para matutunan mo ulit. Okay? So, that is the law of exercise. So implication nito sa ating mga estudyante, kumari, one SEM, pagkatapos, tinanong mo ulit sila on that particular topic, well, expect na magiging mahirap yung understanding nila kasi hindi na nga nila na re-recall. Okay? So, halimbawa, first year, 2018, nagturo ka ng tinikling. Tapos, after 2 years, sabihin mo, sige, magsayaw kayo ng tinikling bukas. That cannot happen overnight. Okay? Dahil, for the past 2 years, hindi naman sila araw-araw nagtitinikling. So, it can only happen if they have consistent practices, if they have consistent schedules of training, so that becomes a muscle memory to them. Pero kung tinuro mo lang ng first SEM at natutunan nga nila ng first SEM nila, pero after 2 years, pinasayaw mo ulit sa kanila, they need to review it. Okay? They need to review the literature, they need to review the dance steps so that they can demonstrate it again. Okay, so meron tayong tinatawag na law of exercise, the law of use and disuse. And then we have the law of effect. This law states that a connection is strengthened if it produces a satisfying effect. Law of effect, pwede siyang reward, okay? Ibig sabihin nun, mas nabibuild yung connection sa'yo doon sa topic na yon kung meron siyang satisfying effect sa'yo. Halimbawa, when I was in first year high school, no, my teacher in Filipino would require us to present a particular topic. And I think ang naano sa akin is about Japanese something. There was a literature in Japanese that she wanted me to present on. So, nung una hindi ako confident. So, I did my presentation. Now, after the lesson, she compared me to the presenters in the 4th year level. So, first year ako noon, and then she said na I was better compared to the presenters in the 4th year level. So, what happened to me? Was there a change in behavior? Yes. It changed my behavior. I became more confident. I became more, kaya ko naman pala. Tama naman pala yung sinasabi ko. So, I did this. I did a lot of presentations. I volunteered for more presentations. So it has a satisfying effect to me. Okay, a satisfying effect to me. And it all began with a praise. It all began with a with just a simple very good, excellent, you are very great. Oh, di ba? So malaki ang impluwensya ng mga praises na ito. Kaya nga, wag nating ipagdamot sa ating mga estudyante yung pagsasabi ng great, excellent, very good, keep up the good work. Wala namang mawawala sa atin eh. So it all started with that, but it the effect was beyond that. Okay, the effect was beyond the classroom eh. Okay, so you have to understand that sometimes, no, kailangan i-praise natin yung mga bata kahit hindi maganda yung ginagawa nila. Make sure na in a way nabibigyan mo pa rin sila ng praises. Okay, so that's the law of effect. Okay, so again, manipulating the behavior of your learners. And then we have the B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning. So ito yung rewards and punishment. Okay, so may reward para to continue up the behavior, pero yung punishment para ma-eliminate yung behavior. So operant conditioning using pleasant or unpleasant consequences to control the occurrence of behavior. Well, this is very observable for elementary pupils and kindergarten pupils, diba? Binibigyan ng star ni teacher, the classroom, at very happy naman si teacher, si kindergarten pupil na magbalita sa parents niya na mama, papa, meron akong star. So what happens there is that he continues or she continues the good job. Or pwede naman si mama na sige anak, pag na-perfect mo yung test mo, pupunta tayo sa Jollibee. Okay? So gagawin ng bata yun. So keep up the good job. Okay? Based on my experience when I was in kinder, my mother would always motivate me that we will go to Jollibee pag na-perfect ko yung exam ko. So I would always want to have a perfect exam para makapunta kami ng Jollibee. So there was one time na na-perfect ko yung exam ko when I was in grade 1, and then yung mama ko wala. She was out of town. So yung papa ko yung naghatid sa akin sa Jollibee. So hindi siya palalabas, yung papa ko hindi siya palalabas. Pero sabi ng mama ko kasi you have to treat the child kasi nga ginawa niya yung dapat niyang gawin. Okay, so kahit ayaw ng papa ko, syempre the mother rules. Okay, so yes. Okay, so mga ganung pagkakataon. At alam ko ginagawa niya yun sa mga estudyante, sa mga bata, sa mga anak niyo. Okay, yung mga may anak na dito, that's a very good strategy. Okay, yung bigyan natin ng reward at bigyan natin ng kung ayaw natin yung behavior nila, it also pays to give them a wholesome punishment. Hindi sobrang punishment naman, pero wholesome punishment lang. Okay, siguro hindi mo sila pakainin ng masarap, mga ganung bagay. Okay, so o kaya naman ay bawasan mo yung reward. Halimbawa, bigyan mo sila ng Jollibee pero wala ang chicken, mga ganun. With rice lang, chicken with rice, walang spaghetti. Mga ganung bagay. Okay, so anong ginagawa mo pag nagbibigay ka ng ganung treatments? Well, you are changing the behavior of your children or of your learners. So basically, ang operant conditioning is on reinforcement. Okay, there are different types of reinforcement: primary reinforcer, secondary reinforcer, positive reinforcer, and negative reinforcer. So yung positive reinforcer is a consequence given to strengthen a behavior. Okay, ang negative reinforcer naman to release from an unpleasant situation to strengthen a behavior. Okay, so yung reward, that's an example of a positive reinforcer. It's a consequence given to strengthen a behavior. Pero yung negative reinforcer, it is a release from an unpleasant situation to strengthen a behavior. So there is it may not be necessarily a punishment, no? You may want to read that online, no? Meron tayong difference. There's a difference between positive and negative reinforcement, but a positive reinforcement may not necessarily may not necessarily point towards a reward, and a negative reinforcement may not necessarily point towards a punishment. Okay, so to know more about that, I will give you that as your assignment, no, to define what positive reinforcement is and negative reinforcement, and how does it relate to rewards and punishment. Okay, so a reinforcement can be verbal, okay, saying good, very good to your students. Activity, pwede mo silang dahil ito ginawa mo, sige, proceed to that activity. It could be physical, give them hugs, give them claps, appear, mga ganon. Could be token, gifts, okay, nonverbal, or anything that is consumable for your learners. So, another cognitive learning theory is Albert Bandura's social cognitive or observational learning theory. So, ang point lang nito is that learners can learn through observation. Okay, so behavioral, tapos na tayo dyan, no? So, tatlo yung ating theories na pinag-usapan dyan, yung operant conditioning ni Skinner, yung classical conditioning ni Ivan Pavlov, and yung laws of learning ni Edward Lee Thorndike. So those are behavioral learning theories. Now let's proceed with cognitive learning theories. And at first, we will be studying about Albert Bandura's social cognitive observational learning theory. The bottom line of this theory is that learners learn through observation. Okay, learners through observation. So they watch, they observe people, they observe their mothers and fathers, they imitate their teacher, and they have the tendency to imitate that behavior and manifest that behavior in real life. Okay, so we have to be very careful about ourselves, especially us among teachers. Okay, so models are classified as real life, okay, tayo, okay, exemplified by the teachers, parents, and significant others, and it can also be symbolic, presented through audio-visual material. So, halimbawa sa internet, no, napakaraming internet personalities ngayon. At mga bata, tendency ginagaya nilang itong mga internet personalities na to. Halimbawa, meron ako nakita sa TikTok na yung bata magdadasal sana. So, instead of ganyan, di ba, one amen, ang ginawa niya, yung sa sayaw, okay, yung ganon. So, how did that learning happen? Well, nakikita niya kasi, napapanood niya. So, learning happens through observation. So, we have to be careful about that, okay? There are many times na yung bata, halimbawa, nagiging aggressive dahil sa pinapanood niya. There was a study that was conducted by a certain psychologist, a team of psychologists, na conclude nila ang anime daw, it can result to aggressive behavior to learners, to children. Diba ang anime sa Japan, like Dragon Ball Z, Flame of Recca, and many more, okay, pag kinapanood daw ng bata, nagiging aggressive sila kasi nga ginagaya nila kung ano yung napapanood nila. So we have to be careful about that too. So as parents, we have to regulate what our children are seeing on television, or in real life, because that in a way will affect how they behave. Okay, so yung symbolic natin, and of course we have the real life. Okay, so the best thing to do is that as sa bahay pa lang, dapat we become role models as parents to our learners. And then according to Albert Bandura, there are 4 phases of observational learning: attention, retention, motor reproduction process, and motivation all process. Ano tong attention? Attention is mere exposure. Okay, expose lang yung bata, nakita niya lang yung learner, nakita niya lang yung kanyang model, nakita niya yung kanyang teacher, so there was an attention. So yung bata, attentive siya, okay, there was a manifestation of attention dahil nakita niya nga yung model niya. Okay, retention, reproduction of the desired behavior, implies that student symbolically retains that observed behavior. So habang nakikita niya, merong nagproproseso sa kanyang utak. Okay, kung anong gagawin niya. Ito maganda ito. Gagayahin ko to. Mga ganung bagay. Okay? So, pag uwi niya, kahit hindi niya na nakikita yung model, alam niya kung ano yung gagayahin niya. And then, number 3, motor reproduction process. After observation, physical skills and coordination are needed for reproduction of the behavior learned. Okay, so halimbawa, napanood niya yung Miss Universe, si Rabia Mateo, Miss Universe 2020. Panood niya. So, there was attention. Panood niya. And then, while watching, okay, ganda yung ganito, ganda yung walk. So after niya pag-uwi, after ng Miss Universe, ano nangyari? Humarap siya sa salamin. Okay? And nag-practice siya kung paano rumampa. So anong inspiration niya? Anong ginaya niya? Well, Miss Universe 2020. And then motivation all process. Although observer acquires and retains ability to perform the model behavior, there will be no overt performance unless conditions are favorable. So unless the conditions are favorable, hindi ma-manifest itong ability to perform na to. Okay, so pwedeng nandito siya sa utak, pero kung condition, if the environmental conditions are not favorable, then there's no external manifestation of that learning, okay, of that behavior learned. Okay, so halimbawa, pag uwi niya, wala naman siyang ramp, wala naman siyang mahabang lugar para rumampa. So hindi nagkakaroon ng opportunity to express that performance overtly. Okay, so it all begins with attention. When you become attentive to a model, to a certain model, to your teacher, to your parents, and then retention of the observed behavior, and then you have motor reproduction process. Okay, naka-coordinate yung motor skills mo to imitate that kind of behavior. Pero if the condition is not present, then there's no external manifestation of that behavior. Another is by David Ausubel. No? David Ausubel's meaningful reception theory. Well, kay David Ausubel naman, meaningful learning occurs when new experiences are related to what learner already knows. This is somehow the same with connectionism. Okay, this is somehow reflect what connectionism is by Edward Lee Thorndike, no? Yung ano niya, yung if you relate a previous lesson to the current lesson, okay? Pero yung meaningful learning kasi pag ganyan, no, who proposed meaningful learning, David Ausubel agad yan. David Ausubel yan. Okay, so meron siyang tatlong konsepto na present sa atin: reception, rote learning, and discovery learning. I will present to you this graph, okay? So, these are the hierarchy of learning according to David Ausubel. Nagsisimula tayo sa rote learning. Okay? Nagsisimula tayo sa rote learning. And then, higher learnings are meaningful learning and autonomous discovery instruction. So, the first dimension relates to the two ways by which knowledge to be learned is made available to the learner. Okay? To the learner. Not to the learning ito. To the learner. So, meron yung meaningful reception. Okay? And then, rote reception to the learning. The second dimension relates to the two ways by which the learner incorporates new information into his existing cognitive structure: meaningful discovery learning, okay, and rote discovery learning. So, titignan natin ito yung first dimension yung nasa x-axis at yung second dimension yung nasa y-axis. So, from reception, from reception instruction to autonomous discovery instruction ito. Okay? And then from rote learning to meaningful learning. So, anong pagkakaiba na bang ito? Kung titignan nyo yung mga strategies, halimbawa, yung mga learning activities na nasa map natin, na nasa graph natin, ito yung mga halimbawa kung saan nagkakaroon ng mataas na meaningful learning, okay, mataas yung meaningful learning, at mataas din yung autonomous learning natin. Dito sa pinakababa, ito yung rote learning tsaka reception instruction. Pag sabing rote learning, no, nabanggit ko to dati, yung minimemorize mo lang, pero hindi mo ina-apply. So, hindi siya meaningful sa'yo kasi minimemorize mo lang. That's the lowest form of learning, knowledge. And then, reception. Pinakikinggan mo, nakikita mo, reception instruction yan. So, halimbawa nito yung multiplication tables, diba? Nakikita mo siya, minimemorize mo lang, that's it. Okay, memorizing and looking at the multiplication tables. Pero kung titignan natin itong nasa taas, okay, scientific research. Pag gumawa ka ng thesis, pag gumawa ka ng research, hindi lang rote learning ang included dyan. Hindi lang rote learning dapat yan. Hindi ka makakagawa ng thesis kung rote learning lang ang ginagamit mo. So, it should be meaningful learning. Okay, kung nakikita natin dito, meaningful learning siya at saka discovery instruction. Kasi kailangan mong to learn on your own, 'di ba? Pag gagawa ka ng thesis, pinababayaan ka na lang ng professor mo. Gawa ka ng RL, gawa ka ng introduction mo. O what happens there? Walang reception dun eh. So ang nangyayari, you have to take the responsibility of learning on your own. So that happens through discovery instruction. So these learners, these activities here, these teaching activities here or classroom activities, no? These are examples of high meaningful learning and then high discovery instruction. This is low reception instruction. This is reception instruction and rote learning. Ito naman, applying formulas to solve problems. So, meron na ditong, hindi na to reception instruction lang kasi kailangan mong meron ka rin i-contribute. Still, rote learning pa rin siya, pero guided discovery instruction na siya. Okay? So, that is how Ausubel defined the two dimensions of learning, no? According to meaningful reception theory. Now, aside from Ausubel, Jerome Bruner on discovery learning. Well, this is self-explanatory. Discovery learning. This is aha learning, di ba? Pag sinabing, aha, ito pala yun, mga ganun. So, it happens accidentally. So, it posits that learning is more meaningful to learners when they have the opportunity to discover on their own the relationships among the concepts or to actively search for a solution to a problem. So, problem-based learning is an example of discovery learning. So, nangyayari ito, pag binibigyan mo yung activities yung mga bata to learn on their own. Okay? But this is not this is not practical for all kinds of disciplines and for all kinds of learners. So there are only specific disciplines, subjects, or types of learners where you can use discovery learning. Now, Richard Atkinson's and Richard Shiffrin's information processing theory. Well, basically, sinasabi nito, in-explain nito kung paano na-retrieve ang information. So, it all starts with encoding. Okay? It all starts with encoding. And then, it is stored as an information. And then, you retrieve it through retrieval. Okay? So, through your senses. Okay? Through your senses, na e-encode yung information sa utak mo, nasa save sa short-term memory. And then, pag kailangan mo, pwede mo siyang ma-retrieve. So, kung hindi naka-open yung senses mo, walang anything na ma-i-store sa iyong memory. So, you have to open your senses so that there will be something that will be stored in your memory, either on your long-term or short-term memory, ready for retrieval. Okay. So, as an end, now that we know the different learning theories and the definitions of learning according to behaviorism and cognitivism, let's talk about what is effective teaching. Okay. Before we proceed on lesson objectives, writing lesson objectives, let's define first what effective teaching is. Okay? 1, lesson clarity. Dapat clear ang lesson mo. Kaya nga siya lesson clarity eh. So, how can you make your lesson clear? You have to know your lesson. You have to master your lesson. Okay? Dapat alam mo yung sinasabi mo. You have to give examples that are related to a lesson. Okay? Marami mga teachers ang directly reading from the PowerPoint but not giving them examples. No? Importante yun, dapat alam mo ang lesson mo. Okay, lesson clarity. You can only do that when you have a mastery of your lesson. Okay, make sure that this is suitable for the type of learners that you have. Instructional variety. So there is flexibility and there is engagement of your students. Okay, flexible ka as a teacher. Okay, hindi yung isang strategy lang ginagamit mo sa classroom, pero marami kang strategies na alam. Okay? This effective teaching strategies, itong mga to, yung qualities na ito, very practical ito or very applicable ito sa high school tsaka elementary. But you don't see this in college teachers, Meron silang lesson clarity, pero pagdating sa instructional variety, madalas sa mga college teachers, lecture, may mga pag-group activities pero not really maximum. Okay, hindi masyadong ginagawa, more on lecture and discussion, because particularly in college kasi specialization na yan specialization, so you have to really listen to a model, to a teacher. Okay, teacher task orientation. You are aware of your time, you are aware of your content, you are aware of an interaction that you can use inside the classroom. Okay, so alam mo kung paano i-manage yung time mo. Okay, and then engagement in the learning process. You set rules, you motivate. Okay, there are also assignments. Alam mong i-manage yung classroom. Well, basically, it all boils down to classroom management. And last but not the least is success rate. Meron kang high standards naman. Okay, meron kang high level. Okay, meron kang standards na sineset para sa mga estudyante mo. Okay, may mga teachers na very low ang standard. In a way, nako-compromise yung learning ng mga bata kasi okay na yan yung ganito. So, kahit mediocre yung output, sige, okay na yan. But we have to set our standards high. Okay? Because it will really benefit our learners. Okay? So, those are the keys of effective teaching. 1, lesson clarity, instructional variety, teacher task orientation, engagement in the learning process, and success rate. We'll learn more about this when we go to our topic on different teaching strategies. Okay, we will be learning what are the different strategies that you can use inside the classroom. Okay, so that ends our lesson on module 3 on learning and teaching principles. I hope that you are able to get insights from my discussion and you're able to be enlightened with the modules that I gave you, So basahin niyo ulit yan, watch this video so that you can have a high score, you can get a good high score in our quiz on learning and teaching principles. Okay, so you still have 2 more quizzes in my class in the midterms, itong quiz na to on learning and teaching principles, and you also will have a quiz on objective specification. Okay, writing instructional objectives. All right. So, goodbye everyone, and I hope that you are safe. I hope that everything is normal. Goodbye everyone, and God bless you all.